ओम नमः पाणिनि कात्यायन पतंजलि शब्दविद्या संप्रदाय कर्तृभ्यो वंश ऋषिभ्यो नमो महद्भ्यो गुरुभ्यः. Welcome one and all. Today I am privileged to introduce chairperson of our Mahamohopadhyay Pandit Vasudev Shastri Abhyankar Sanskrit Pathashala, Dr. Saroja Bhate, who is a towering personality in the field of Sanskrit, well known all over the world as grammarian, thorough scholar of manuscriptology and also Sanskrit literature. Though her introduction runs into pages, I would restrict myself to few highlights of her illustrious career. She was introduced to Sanskrit grammar by Pandit Vaman Shastri Bhagavat and then principal of Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapith, Pune. Her further study in Sanskrit grammar was under many stalwarts like Dr. R.N. Dandekar, Dr. S.D. Joshi, Dr. Palsule, and many others. Later, she joined as a professor at Savitribai Phule Pune University and later took charge as head of the Department of Sanskrit and Prakrit languages. She successfully carried the responsibility on her shoulders and added upon the legacy of her predecessors through organizing seminars, workshops, etc. for students and teachers alike. She was former honorary secretary of Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute and presently she is general secretary of All India Oriental Conference since last 15 years. She is a chairman of managing committee of Vedic Sanshadhan Mandal Adarsh Sanskrit Shodha Sanstha, Pune, which has flourished under her guidance. She is also president of Prajna Pathashala Mandal Vai, where she is heading Dharma Kosha project. She has received many awards for her work in the field of Sanskrit, and the most prestigious being President's Certificate of Honor in the year 2008. She has authored several books on Indology, Panini, and Vakpadya of Bhartrihari. But students like us has all for students like us, she has always been a teacher, guide, who, through her passion for Panini, nurtured love for Sanskrit grammar within students. However, she teaches Meghaduta of Kalidasa and other Sanskrit literature with equal authority, a feat rarely found amongst grammarians. It is an honor for us today to hear Dr. Saroja Bhate on Introduction to Panini and learn nuances hitherto unknown. I would like Dr. Saroja Bhate to guide us through her lecture.
Hello everyone, glad to be here with you this evening. Thank you Rohan for giving me this opportunity and arranging this meeting for me. As the person who introduced me has rightly said, I have really a great passion not only for Panini but also for teaching. And in one of my interviews I said that is because I am an egoistic person. I always like to be praised and appreciated by everyone, and I always like to be a boss. So when you are in a classroom, you are the boss as a teacher, and the students are always the bossed ones. So through teaching, I can boss a few people, and therefore I like teaching very much. Anyway, so coming back to the topic, I'm supposed to give you an introduction to Panini. Within a period of say 40-50 minutes, you really cannot understand what Panini is. But even then, at least a few salient features we can discuss today. I really don't know how many of you or whether all of you are really acquainted with all facets of Panini's grammar, or how much deep you are in Panini. But assuming that all of you do not know much about Panini, I would like to straight away begin with addressing the question who Panini is. It's quite likely that whatever I will be talking to you about Panini today is already known to you. In that case, it will be a kind of a abhyasa, you can call it abhyasa for you. Repetition. Abhyasa literally means repetition, as all of you know. And for those who don't know, it will be something new. So this is how I understand my lecture to be taken. So who Panini is? The answer known to all of us is that Panini is a grammarian of Sanskrit. We also know that Panini's grammar is one of the necessary components of the syllabus of Sanskrit studies in all schools, universities, almost I should say, not only in India but also probably all over the world. But what we must know, all the students of Panini, they must know is that Panini is the greatest grammarian. He is the greatest grammarian of Sanskrit among all the grammarians, the whole galaxy of grammarians who existed before Panini, who came after Panini. Panini shines as a star. He is the greatest grammarian of Sanskrit, grammarians of all languages, not only in India. And my last utterance about his greatness is that he is the greatest grammarian of the world. And this is no exaggeration. The linguists all over the world have acknowledged his greatness. His grammar has been recognized, acknowledged as the oldest and the foremost grammar of a language that could ever be composed. So that is the first thing we have always to take into account. So when we are studying grammar, we are studying one of the greatest intellectuals of this country. We are trying to go nearer to his achievements. As I told you, he is the greatest and the oldest, at the same time the perfect available grammarian among all the grammarians of the world. I don't mean that no grammarians preceded him. As far as India is concerned, the studies of grammar, they started actually with the Vedic period. They began with the Vedas themselves. And later on, as you know, Vyakarana being one of the 6 ancillary texts, Vedangas, the study of Vyakarana flourished to a large extent even before Panini. And there were several grammarians who composed their grammars, like Shakalya and Gargya and Shapatayana, Sputayana, and so on. Panini himself mentions at least 10 of them. So grammars of different grammarians, they did exist before Panini. But after the rise of Panini on the horizon of this linguistic world, all these grammars, they were almost eclipsed. They are no more available to us today. None of these grammars are available. Only some stray references in some grammatical or some ritual texts are found. And it's only Panini's grammar which is available, which is handed down to us through the centuries in its complete form. And it is still being recited. It is still being recited even in Vedic Pathashalas as one of the sacred texts. Similarly, many other grammarians and grammatical systems such as Katantra, Jainendra, Hemachandra, Shapatayana, and a few others, they also followed Panini and they composed their own grammars, which developed into grammatical systems. And some of them they did continue for some time in some parts of the countries. They continued to be studied. But what we find is that ultimately, what we find today is that Panini reigns supreme. It is his grammar which has again eclipsed all the other grammatical systems, and it is being studied all over the country, all over the world. Now, coming to the next point, what do we know about Panini's life and time? There are very scanty references about Panini's life. What we know about him is that he belonged to a place called Shalatura. And this Shalatura is nowadays, recently, it is being identified with a place called Lahore, not Lahore, which is found in Pakistan. And therefore, I read an article long ago in a newspaper, and the title of the article was Panini belonged to Pakistan. So yes, as far as the available evidence is concerned, Panini comes from Pakistan. The place Shalatura is still there under the name Lahore. And when I inquired about the any monument or any institute, etc., there, and Panini being studied in Pakistan with these scholars in archaeology, etc., then I got the reply that yes, there is a place which is still maintained as the monument of Panini in Pakistan. People of Pakistan who stay around that place still respect Panini, and they were soon going to institute an organization in the name of Panini. Whether it exists today, I really have no idea. But yes, Panini does belong to Pakistan as far as this reference is concerned. Another reference we come across is that he was Dakshi Putra. His mother's name was Dakshi. As far as his time is concerned, from the available linguistic references and from the study of the language of the sutras in comparison with the language of other Vedic texts, it has been established that he belonged to the period of 5th century before Christ. So he belonged to, you can say, I belong to a period around, say, 2500 years ago. This much about his date and time, we really don't know much about it, and there are several anecdotes, of course, about his life and his teachings and his guru. According to some, he was a dullard and he did not know anything, and then he was kicked out by his guru from his Pathashala. And then he went to Lord Shiva and he worshipped Shiva. And then as a boon, he got these 14 Shiva Sutras and then grammar and all that. Well, these are again, mythological accounts, or you can say fairy tale like accounts, which we may not believe in. But there are some accounts which we find in the historical records, such as the reports from the Chinese travelers, Yuan Chuang and Iching. And according to these reports, Panini worked very hard in collecting linguistic data from different places. He studied the data very carefully, and then he composed his grammar. And then he took his grammar to the then ruler, who was very much pleased with it. And then the ruler, he issued a decree, announced in his kingdom, that whosoever studies the grammar will receive great rewards, etc. This is the account which we find in these reports. They also mentioned that they saw some statues of Panini. Well, nowadays we don't have any statues of Panini anywhere, and we really don't know where exactly he studied all that. So for the time being, we have to believe in these accounts. Those who really want to know more about Panini's life and time, they can just Google or they can read more in these accounts. Coming back to Panini's grammar. So what is so great about Panini's grammar, which earned him a great fame? Because if you come across Panini's description given in different linguistic works, even of the West, you will find that he is always praised in very high terms. For instance, there is one scholar, Bloomfield, an American linguist belonging to the last century. He calls his grammar as one of the greatest monument of human intelligence. And there are several other, accolades presented to Panini. So what exactly is so great about his grammar? Well, there are several features, several unique features of his grammar. We cannot deal with all of them during this time, but maybe if some students among you, or if all of you show more interest in that, maybe we can talk about it later also. But I will touch upon some points of Panini's grammar. some unique characters of his grammar. First of all, what strikes me is that his grammar, Ashtadhyayi, is the first available grammar of a spoken language. Before Padani, all the linguistic activities, all the grammatical activities, they were revolving around Vedic language, sacred language, preservation of the sacred language. And they were mainly concerned with the Vedic language. Although there were some grammarians like Shakalya, Garge, etc., whom Panini mentions, they did compose their grammars of spoken language. And so Panini was not a pioneer in this respect. Even then, we can say that Panini was the first available Sanskrit grammarians, because the grammars of his predecessors, as I told you earlier, they are not available to us. As I said, Panini's grammar is a living document of spoken Sanskrit. This is again a debatable issue. Nowadays, if we read different works on Sanskrit language, we find different views about whether it was really a spoken language. And the general opinion is that it was not a spoken language. It was a language of the ritual. It was the language of a priestly class. And its use was limited to a particular class in the society. But if we come to Panini's grammar, and if we go through rather in detail the vocabulary which is generated by his grammar, we can be sure about the existence of Sanskrit as a spoken language. So from this point of view, his grammar is a very, very important document to tell the people that Sanskrit was at one point of time a spoken language, not spoken only among the priests, not spoken only within the priestly circle, but it was spoken in general by all kinds of people, by all classes, including women. And what I say so is mainly because those who have studied Tadita section, they might bear witness to this fact that quite a few words derived in the Tadita section, they belong to the kitchen context. And if we don't agree that women were also speaking Sanskrit at one point of time, then we will have to say that when words like cooked in oil, fried in oil, baked in something, or mixed with curds or some such thing, all these things, then we have to attribute to the men. And then we will have to say that instead of women, men were cooking in the kitchen during Panini's time. So this is how we will have to conclude, but I'm sure men will not like this kind of an attribution to them any time in the history. Now, we know that Panini's grammar is composed in sutra style. And we also know what the sutra means. That the very well-known definition of sutra is known to all the students of Panini, all the students of grammar. It says alpaksharam, asandigdham, saravad, vishwatomukham, astobham, anavadyam cha, sutram, sutra vido vidu. So these are all the characteristics of the sutra, and if they are present in the composition, then only we can call it sutra. Now, we know that there are several sutra texts. Shruta Sutras, Dharma Sutras, Griya Sutras, and later on we have many sutra texts like Kama Sutra, even Bhakti Sutra later on. So sutra became a particular genre of literature later on. But even before Panini, there existed quite a few sutra works. So again, we can say that in writing in sutra style, Panini was not a pioneer. But even then, we can say that his sutras are the most perfect example of the sutra style. He has composed them as mathematical formulae. I studied all the sutras of Panini, and I have arrived at a specific formula in which each and every sutra of Panini can be fitted well. It is like an algebraic formula. The formula is like this: A is B if C. I don't know whether you can see this paper. Do you see this?
Yes. Yes.
No,
But can
not very clearly. Can you
uh,
read it? Can you
yeah.
read it?
Sutra A is B into bracket if C
Yes.
sarvadini sarvanamani.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So, what it means is that each and every sutra consists of only 3 words and necessarily of 2 words. I put C into the bracket because C is optional. It appears in some sutras and it doesn't appear in other sutras. And A and B are the components which are necessarily found in each and every sutra. And beyond that, I did not find any other words which are necessary components of the sutra. I'll come to that point a little later. But let us first of all try to understand the examples. So Sarvadini, Sarvanamani. Sarvadini A, Sarvanamani B. And then Iko, Yan, Achi. Very well known to you. Did I give this rule? Yes. So again A, B and C. Achi is a nimitta, it's a condition that it is either a purva nimitta or a para nimitta. And then a similar sutra is Hano Vadha Lingi. Again here we have
This can
A.
you move the paper upward, little bit upward? Yes, yes. Still upward direction.
Okay, now?
No, still upward. Yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Hano Vadha, I'm very sorry I could not prepare these transparency slides, etc.
Okay, no.
I'm dead tired of these things now. Anyway, Hano Vadalingi is the same as, the structure is the same as Iko Yan Achi. And lastly, I have taken a sutra like Ato Nupasarge Kaha. Here also we have the 3 components A, B and C, but the order is changed. C comes in between A and B. So, okay, I hope you have understood the structure of each and every sutra in Panini's grammar. So, this is how each and every sutra is written down. It is composed. Now, what I maintain is that Panini's sutra does not speak anything more or less than these 3 types of words. Of course, sometimes particles like cha, va, vibhasha, and anyatasya. Such particles they appear, but they are, they are always described as qualifiers, visheshana, or modifiers. But they are not necessarily concerned with the main content or the main statement of the sutra. So you can say that the language of Panini's grammar, or you can go further and say that the grammar of the language of Panini's grammar consists of only one sentence, which contains Uddeshya and Videya. That's all. And Videya part, of course, includes the condition Nimitta. As you know, generally Videya also comes along with the Nimitta. So, Uddeshya, Videya, and Nimitta are the 3 components at the most in Panini's grammar. And thus, if one wants to write the grammar of the language of Panini's grammar, he has to write the grammar of just one sentence and that's all. That is enough. But that is really not enough. Because if we go into the details of this language, you will be awed, you will be shocked. And this brings me to my another point, and that is the meta language of Panini's grammar, or meta language of Panini. And what is a meta language? Meta language is the language in which a scientific treatise is described. So it always contains a kind of a paribhasha, For instance, in a book on chemistry or in a scientific treatise describing chemistry, you have formula like NCl, H2O, etc. So these formulae, they form the technical vocabulary. So a meta language always has 2 or 3 components. So basically it is technical vocabulary. As far as Panini's grammar is concerned, we can say the meta language is initially Sanskrit. You know, a grammar of a language can be written in any language. For instance, you have many grammars of Sanskrit written in Marathi, Hindi, English, German, French, and many other languages. But this is the grammar which is written in Sanskrit, which describes Sanskrit. So both the object language, which means the language under description, is Sanskrit, and the meta language, the language in which the description takes place, is also Sanskrit. But even if we call it Sanskrit, not any general student of Sanskrit is able to understand a single rule of Panini, say Iko Yanachi, even Vriddhiradaic, take for example, unless and until he knows the technique in which these sutras are composed. And this is where we come to the point of meta language. That is a unique contribution made by Panini, and Panini is more highly praised for his meta language, his method of writing a grammar, his descriptive technique, than for his complete description of Sanskrit language. For that also he is really appreciated. But he is more appreciated for his contribution to the theory of grammar. And this is one of the major contributions coming from Panini. So as I said, the Sanskrit meta language of Panini is actually the language of his technical vocabulary, of his abbreviations, and it is again composed in a typical style of composition, which is again typical and which comes only from Panini. So let us try to look at these features one by one. What do we understand from technical vocabulary or technical terminology? It's simple terms, it means Paribhashika Saudhya. So all these Paribhashika Saudhyas you already are acquainted with, such as Vriddhi, Guna, Samprasarana, etc., etc. And these are at least meaningful Saudhyas, but there are some meaningless Saudhyas like T, Gu, Ga, Go. They form the component of technical vocabulary. Panini has used some, say, 200 technical terms in his grammar. And some of them are found also used in Sanskrit language, such as Vriddhi, Guna, etc. But they are used in a different meaning. And some of them, like T, Gu, Ga, Go, etc., they are never used in any language, and they don't really make any sense outside Panini's grammar. Similarly, along with this technical terminology, Panini also uses some abbreviations, which we call pratyaharas. The term pratyahara is not found in Panini's grammar. It's a later grammatical term. And he uses these short terms. You are already acquainted with these terms, like say ach and hal. Ik, yan, ach. It's a very, very well-known example. So these abbreviations also form a very major part of Panini's meta language. They are not found elsewhere. Of course, abbreviations of different kinds are found in different Shravata texts, and we really don't know whether Panini's predecessors are acquainted with that in the absence of any concrete evidence. Panini also uses anubandhas, which in his grammar are known as it. He defines them as it. And these anubandhas are again like code letters. They are also called mute letters. And each one of them is assigned a particular function. And after indicating that function, that Anubandha disappears. It has a very, very transitory existence. Kshanabangura. Anubandha is a Kshanabangura entity in Panini's grammar. It disappears as soon as it performs its own function. And its function is to indicate maybe some grammatical operation or some non-grammatical event. I always compare Anubandhas whenever I teach Panini with traffic lights. So these traffic lights, they flicker for a moment. They indicate something. For instance, red says stop and green says go. And immediately after indicating that, they disappear. The same thing happens with these Anubandhas. And they also perform some grammatical functions like say vritti, guna, etc. Just to give you one example, you already know the word taila, which is derived from the root tila, and the suffix added to the word tila is an. And this an is with the Anubandha na, which indicates that the word to which an is added gets its first vowel lengthened. And therefore, ti or e in ti becomes I. And thus we have the word, the derivative, tail. Now we come to the third aspect of his meta language, and that is style of composition. We have already seen that it is composed in sutra style, and sutra, as you know, means thread, string. Ashtadhyayi itself is a sutra. We really come across many references to Ashtadhyayi as Ashtakam Sutram, Panini Sutram. So the whole text is called sutra, and also the individual formulae, rules, are called sutras. But the term sutra fits well or better with the whole text. So all these sutras in the Ashtadhyayi, or the rules in the Ashtadhyayi, they are, like flowers strung into one garland or a wreath, mala. And then, just as the flowers in a garland cannot be rearranged, they have a fixed order. They are connected with each other. One flower is very closely connected with the preceding and the succeeding, and you cannot we cannot move or shift it from its original place. The same is case with the rules in the Ashtadhyayi. And in that sense, they are all sutras, and the whole Ashtadhyayi is also a sutra. And because they cannot be changed, their place cannot be moved, their meanings are fixed. You cannot change their meanings. And why are they fixed like this? It is because it is the demand of the sutra style of Panini. Panini has arranged them in a particular sequence in such a manner that each sutra borrows words from the preceding sutra, or sometimes even from the preceding sutras, in order to complete its meaning. Just to give you one example, there is a rule, hano vadha linge, which means that in ling formation, the root hana becomes vadha. Hano vadha linge. So we have all the three, A, B, and C. And then the next rule is lungi chu, which means that hana becomes vadha also in lung formations. Now, from where do you get this meaning? The sutra simply reads lungi chu, only one word lungi. So, in order to complete the meaning, the sutra borrows the words hano vadha from the previous sutra. So, this act of borrowing the necessary content from the previous sutra is known as anuvritti. And this is a very, very highly technical device used by Panini. Actually, anuvritti is used also in our day-to-day speech. And linguists call it ellipsis, the technique of ellipsis. But it is a more technical scientific notation in Panini's grammar. It is not just ad hoc as we use it in the language. And all these devices, technical terminology and pratyaharas and anubandhas and anuvritti, what? And where do they lead us? Or where did they lead Panini? They help Panini to achieve his samamvana, to his highest goal. And what was the highest goal? Brevity, laghava, which was the most necessary condition of sutra. The sutra is composed in order to achieve laghava of expression. So sutra is the shortest possible expression of a statement having a large content. And this shortness, pithiness, conciseness is achieved and successfully achieved by using all these devices, such as, first of all, I did not mention, but that is verbless sentence. Verb is completely missing in Panini's grammar, except the words like drushyante, etc., but they are not a part of this statement. Anyeshvapi drushyante, anyebhyopi drushyante, etc. But otherwise, a Panini sutra is always a nominal sentence. Then how about verb? How can you make it a sentence? The verb asti or bhavati is understood in each and every sutra. For instance, iko yan achi, the verb is missing. We say ikaha sthane yan bhavati achi. And even for sthane and achi parataha, there is a paribhasha provided by Panini, with the help of which we rephrase the rule, and then we understand its meanings. So all these features together, they contribute to what is recently known as the mathematical structure of Panini's grammar. Panini's sutras are composed like algebraic formulae, and the whole grammar is composed in a mathematical style. Well, there are many other features which I did not mention to you, and I will have to describe them quite in a detail, that if you are interested, we can go through that a little later. For instance, there is a feature like Savarnya. I am sure some of you have already studied this concept of Savarna. Anudit Savarna se cha pratyaya. So each and every sound used in Panini's grammar in the Uddeshya part actually represents all its Savarnas. So O stands for 18 akaras. E stands for 18 ikaras. So if we take into account this feature of Savarnya, say for instance, then we will find that one single rule in Panini's grammar can speak for hundreds of rules. One single rule is a statement, it's a compressed statement of hundreds of rules. Just take the same example, iko yan achi. Apparently it is just one statement. Ik becomes yan when ach follows. Then when we break all these pratyaharas into their individual phonemes, then we can arrive at 4 sutras, which are I becomes ya, O becomes va, Ru becomes R, and Lu becomes la. So 4 letters. And then we go further, and then we count each 18 varieties or whatever varieties are there of each sound. Say E 18, U 18, and even these Lagu, Guru, Raswa, Dirgha, Pluta, and then Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, all these 18 varieties of E, U, Ru, 30, Ru and Lu together, 30, and Ach, basically 9 vowels, and again each one of them representing a different number of vowels, such as 18 18 E, 18 U, 30 Rulu, 12 A, 12 O, 12 I, and 12 Au. So 132 vowels on the Nimitta side, and say how many vowels on the Uddeshya side. Videya, we cannot think of Savarnas. But then you try to by permutation and by combination, you try to count the number of the sutras. How many sutras are compressed into one single sutra by Panini? Hundreds of sutras, you can see. Just maybe someone of you can go on counting and tell me next time how many sutras are there. I had made that exercise earlier in my life, but now I forgot and I don't want to count anymore. I'm a lazy person now. But anyway, this point is enough to tell you the beauty of the mathematics of Panini and why he is called a mathematician. Because of this algebraic character and the mathematical style. So Panini is very highly praised as one of the ancient mathematicians of the world. If you Google search, you will find, particularly in the list of mathematicians, one of the first 100 mathematicians of the world, you will find, I'm sure, and I have seen it and I have checked it and then I checked, that Panini appears, the name Panini appears in the list of one of the first 100 mathematicians of the world. So he is very highly praised. His language of grammar is compared with the language of computer. It is sometimes compared with algorithm, with calculus, and sometimes also with a very highly technical computer language like Algol 60 and so on. So he is also compared with Euclid, the father of geometry, who probably belonged to the same period in which Panini lived. And now I come to my last point. I say last point because I want to give more time also to questions after this. And I always love each and every session to be interactive rather than being monotonous and a monologue. So I always prefer students talking to me and discussing things. The last point is about the composition Ashtadhyayi itself. The text of the Ashtadhyayi, as the name suggests, 8 chapters, Ashtav Adhyaya. Each one of them is divided into 4 paras. So it comes to 8 into 6, 8 into 4, 32. Now this division is not always based on the subject matter of the Ashtadhyayi. You cannot say that, well, Sandhi is treated in this section, Samasa, and then Halanta Pullinga here and Halanta Strilinga in that section, and Sora is dealt with here. No, nothing like that. Although the basic, you can say the skeleton of the text was thematic, it was based on subject matter. The arrangement of the rules is not thematic. It is completely governed by the dictates of Anuvritti. So it is Anuvritti which decides the order of the sutras. And therefore there is no Anukramanika. There is no table of contents for the Ashtadhyayi. And if you open the manuscripts of Ashtadhyayi, Roman will tell you that there is no title, there are no headings, there are no shirshakas for each and every chapter, etc. Sometimes, of course, we come across some sections which are limited to certain topics, like, there is a Samasa section 2, 1, 2, 2. And there is a Pratyaya section 3 and 4 and 5 altogether. But even samasa, as far as the prakriya, samasa derivation, its accent, and many other things like the samasanta pratyaya, dirgha, etc. They are dealt with in different other sections. Similarly, though pratyayas like ting, krut, tadita, samasanta, etc., they are put together in one section. But the derivations, say, for instance, add and suffix to dasharatha and derive the form dasharathi. In order to derive this word, you cannot have a sutra or you cannot have the go for the prakriya in the same section. Pani doesn't give it in the same section. It is given in a still different section. And therefore, the order is completely different. And as I said, it is completely governed by the principles of anuvritti. Anuvritti definitely has certain very, very scientific principles. So, due to the absence of this subject-wise arrangement, the rules in the Ashtadhyayi, they are not actually understandable to a common student. If you just open the book of Ashtadhyayi and say, okay, let me try to study grammar of Sanskrit with the help of Ashtadhyayi by myself. I don't need any teacher. I'll do it myself. No, nothing can happen. Even with the help of Guru also, you cannot study a Sanskrit grammar with the help of Ashtadhyayi, the order, with the help of the order in which the sutras are composed. And that is why, for the facilitation of the study, for the convenience of the student, the text was rearranged in the form of prakriya. And so we have a series of prakriya granthas which followed Ashtadhyayi in the course of time for the benefit of the students. And then we have prakriya granthas like Prakriya Kaumudi, and then later on Siddhanta Kaumudi, and then Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi, Madhya Siddhanta Kaumudi, and Sara Siddhanta Kaumudi, depending upon the caliber of the student, depending upon the class of students where the text is to be taught. I remember I sent a large amount of Sara Siddhanta Kaumudi once to a university in Switzerland, because they were teaching Sara Siddhanta Kaumudi there. Now, I really don't know whether at any place in this country, Sara Siddhanta Kaumudi is being taught. So, it will be thus clear that Panini's Ashtadhyayi was never meant to be taught in the classroom by a teacher. It was not a text meant for teaching. Because whenever we begin our study of Panini's grammar, we begin with a text like Laghu Kaumudi or Siddhanta, but we just don't straight away visit Ashtadhyayi, the first sutra, Vriddhi and then begin the study of Vyakara. That is not possible. But then the question arises, why was Ashtadhyayi composed then, if it was not meant for teaching? What was it meant for then? And it is composed in such a terse, difficult style and code language. The reason why the text of Panini's grammar was composed in this particular style was that the basic purpose of composing this grammar was memorization, kanthasthikaran. In ancient times in India, all education was imparted through oral tradition. Oral tradition governed the whole area of knowledge. Even today, we find this practice continues in our Vedic Pathashalas. Vedas are still taught through memorization. So, in order to relieve stress on memory, in order to relieve or lessen the burden on memory, texts in ancient, particularly scientific texts in ancient India, they were composed in sutra style, so that it becomes very easier for students to memorize it. So the text was never ever meant for teaching Sanskrit grammar. It was meant for those, and again a very paradoxical statement I'm making. The text was meant for those who already knew the whole grammar of Panini, who had studied the grammar, who perfectly were acquainted with Sanskrit. It was meant for such people, because otherwise it was unintelligible to those who did not know anything of grammar, who did not know anything of even of Sanskrit. So for a beginner, it was never meant. So I think now I stop here, and I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity, and also for giving me a patient listening, hopefully. And I am welcoming any questions, any interactions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an awe-inspiring lecture. I remember in one of your interviews you mentioned that one should develop the system of learning in which one understands Panini in the light of Panini and not through the eyes of Bhashyakara or Vartikakara. I was really fascinated by that statement and by that sentence, but now I understood what really that statement means, and it has opened my eyes, and of course for others also, to look at Paninian grammar in a new way,